or do you want me to do that? Anyway, do you want to jump in, or do you? Who wants to go first?
I think we're ready. I think we're ready to start. The recording has started. I'm happy to get us going. Welcome everybody. Calling to order this meeting of the Assembly Public Safety Committee. It is February 2nd at 11:11, and let's do a roll call, please.
Ms. Kennedy?
Here.
Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Mr. Constant? Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Ms. Dolitow? Ms. Quinn Davidson? Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Ms. Allard?
Here.
Ms. LaFrance?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Welcome everyone. We have a pretty full agenda today, so I'm going to just move right into our first item. We have a presentation on murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, and I'm going to hand it over to whomever is going to start. Who's going to get us started here?
Hi, my name's Kelsey Potvin. I'm a tribal court facilitator at Alaska Native Justice Center. I can get the screen share started, I believe. So I'll pull up our presentation. Deb, would you want to take a second to introduce yourself?
Sure, I can get started with that while you're getting set up. My name's Deborah Ogara. My Tlingit name is Djuksuk. I am calling in from Petersburg, and I'm really happy to be with this group to make this presentation. I am the Senior Policy Specialist for the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center.
Okay, great. I think I have us set up. Alex will be unable to join us this morning. He's finishing up another presentation in another room. I hope he can join us, but otherwise I can help fill in for his part. So I think some of you may be familiar with the Alaska MMIW G2S working group. But we are a collection of 6 organizations that meet weekly. And everyone brings a different set of skills and talents to the table. And I think a couple of years ago, the organizations that first got this started, it might have been when they were getting appointed, when Emily, Kendra, and Okpik were being appointed to the PSAC committee, and I don't want to speak for them, but I think that's when they got this working group started. You know, just we should all collaborate. We're all working on this in some different way or another. We just need to keep tabs on what all of our organizations are doing. So the work group has grown. As you can see, it has Native Peoples Action and Community Fund in it, Alaska Native Heritage Center, Alaska Native Women's Resource Center, Native Movement, Data for Indigenous Justice, and then Alaska Native Justice Center. And we were able to join this group in the last year or so. And so it's, you know, this is a multi-organizational effort. We not only coordinate our work, we're doing work along policy lines. We also do work in raising awareness and providing opportunities for healing for families and communities that have been affected by the MMIP or the MMIW G2S crisis. For anyone who isn't familiar, this acronym stands for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls and Two-Spirit People. Different organizations call it different things. Cook Inlet Tribal Council and Alaska Native Justice Center, we say Missing and Murdered Indigenous People, MMIP, and that's to account for the sheer numbers of missing and murdered Alaska Native men. So how we're going to organize this presentation, I'm going to provide a little bit of background on the issue. We're not going to dwell for very long or explain the nitty-gritty of why this is situated the way it is in our community and in our state and in our country. But just talking about what's going on, what we understand to be going on, what we're learning about the issue, and then I'm going to let Deb share what is going on in response from the community. After that, I think that I'll take it back up and I will share about what we're hearing and what we're asking for and just opportunities for Anchorage. Let me see if I can move my slide. Okay, there we go.
And just before you get started, I just want to note for the record that Ms. Zolotel is here as well. She was just unable to unmute when we were doing roll call. Thanks.
All right, thank you. All right, so in my role at Alaska Native Justice Center, I spend a lot of time working with our grants team to try to come up with statistics related to disproportional victimization of Alaska Native people. And these kinds of numbers can help us when we're applying to federal grants from the DOJ or from the BIA to understand what our situation is here. And so frequently we will also start out presentations with these kinds of statistics that 80% of Native women are going to experience violence during their lifetime, and that 56% of Alaska's sexual assault victims are Native people. If you look at the recent census, if you look at different numbers that the state keeps, you'll see that Native people represent in between 15 or 20% of the population. So these numbers they're devastating, they're disproportional, but the more, what we're trying to convey generally when we share these kinds of statistics, ANJC, we also keep information related to out-of-home care placements for kids. OCS tracks that information and what percentage of those children are Native. We look at dating violence during high school. I believe that an Alaska Native student is over 2 times more likely to experience physical dating violence while they're in high school. Interactions with the juvenile justice system, and also trafficking among homeless youth. I think Anchorage, out of a 10-city study, Anchorage had the highest rate of trafficking of homeless youth, especially Native youth. So these numbers are terrible, but what we're trying to say is that from birth, from the cradle to old age, there's just a marked pattern of disproportionate victimization. And so this is terrible. There's a bright side to it too, because there's a lot of different things going on. It means that there's a lot of opportunities for prevention. There are many upstreaming things that our different agencies and organizations and communities can do to change these statistics. And the other reason we share the statistics is because these different types of victimization, they can complicate or contribute to the circumstances that might lead someone to become missing or murdered. So, the other thing is we want to impart that this isn't a crisis coming out of thin air, and that there are options for how we can address it. Okay. And so part of the way the Native community and allies have been responding to this is to understand what this crisis is. There have been instances where different justice or government agencies have conducted report or research and surveys. And, one example of this is in Southwest Alaska. They did a report and they found that the Aleutian Pribilof Island region had a really low crime rate and that this wasn't a problem and in fact should maybe be a model. But in fact, that wasn't the case. When the community did their own research, looking back at history, they found this pattern from even when the Russians arrived to present day of Native people in the region not receiving justice, and the actual numbers were far higher than what was reported. And so that's just a story that shares why we're doing some of this research ourselves. Some of you may be familiar with the 2018 report that came out of the Urban Indian Health Institute in Seattle, that it started to look at the numbers and the data and started to find the holes, just really to share with people what the holes in the data meant, what having all those discrepancies and gaps meant for how we understand this problem. What it did find in its initial survey of the country was that Alaska had the 4th highest number of cases for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls by state. It found that Anchorage had the 3rd highest cases by city. And we all know we're not a huge city. We're a good mid-sized city. In 2021, Data for Indigenous Justice did an Alaska-specific baseline report, and there's a screenshot of that report on there. I recommend everyone take a look at it. They found 229 cases of MMIW in Alaska. 149 of these people were missing, and 80 of these women were murdered. And so from 2018 to 2021, the numbers went up. And so these are baseline numbers. You can ask OCPIC for more current data, but I believe, the point I'm trying to make here is that every time a new report comes out, or the more research that gets dedicated to this, the more cases we find, the more work there is to be done. So this isn't a crisis that's going to go away on its own. If you're interested in tracking what's going on, NamUs, which is the National Missing Persons Database, is now posting monthly updates on missing and murdered Indigenous persons. And you can see that the more research they put into it, the more outreach they do for families to put their loved ones' information into the NamUs database. It's just the curve, it looks like this. And it just shows, it doesn't mean that there's a dramatic increase in cases, but just shows us how much work there is to be done. And NamUs is one example of a government agency that has changed the way it's working with Native communities and has been responsive. And it's now setting itself up to do some problem solving. So this next slide talks a little bit more about how this problem is situated in our lives today. One of the things that the UIHI, or Urban Indian Health Institute, report shared was that missing people, or Native people, go missing in multiple ways. First, they go missing physically in life, and then the media fails to pick up the story and no one hears about it. And then the data doesn't record it accurately. And this aspect is getting better. There's still a lot of work to be done. Here's a picture of a cuspuk you may have seen to help raise awareness around the issue. So Native communities have taken it upon themselves to raise the issue and to demand change. Okay, so Deborah, I'm going to switch over to you and let you go for it. And just let me know when you need me to switch to the side.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kelsey. So now Kelsey just went through pretty much what the status is, and that we're in a crisis. We've been in the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous people for a number of years. As she said, nothing new. And there's been a lot of responses. So we're not at a loss of what to do. We have a number of tools. We have federal and state efforts that are in play, local efforts, especially with the working group that both Kelsey and I represent, as well as other organizations who are actively working on education, awareness, advocacy, coordination, and support to tribes, tribal communities, and individual families who are directly affected by murdered when their loved ones go missing or are found to be murdered. And some of those I'm going to talk about in this slide. There's also, of course, as Kelsey said, staff and staff folks of several of our organizations who are also on councils, on commissions, on committees like this one here. The picture that is here shows, this is why we wear red, which is become the color to symbolize the MMIW movement. And this is a cover for the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center, which is my organization. And we put together a toolkit specifically for tribal communities and families who are faced with having to deal with law enforcement, deal with maybe making funerals arrangements, or actually engaging in search parties, looking for somebody who has gone missing, either in their home community or someplace urban, which is in itself a huge challenge. In this toolkit, we talk about really multi-pronged approach. And we also talk about communities really looking at what are the strengths and weaknesses in their community so that when tragedy does occur, that they are prepared to respond in as swift a manner as possible in order to hopefully find somebody who's gone missing before they're murdered, or to find somebody who has been murdered so that the community and especially the family can arrange for closure and begin the grieving process for that. So that toolkit is available online. And Kelsey, who's much faster on posting things on chat than I am, might be able to find that. If not, well, when she takes over, I'll try to find that. But that's on our website at aknwrc.org, and you can find that toolkit. The other things that we have going here in the state is we do have a federal Office of Missing and Murdered Indigenous People coordinator who has been working across the state with tribal communities, law enforcement, tribal governments, as well as other state agencies to put together community response plans. And there are several that are putting together a response template that they can use and actually testing them out. So that's really good. And in the process of testing them out, they're again able to find out the strengths and weaknesses, and identifying those weaknesses are particularly important because then before again this tragedy occurs, those gaps can be filled. And if anybody wants more information on that, they can contact any one of us. And then, of course, several of us are working in another working group that's putting together better responses within our tribal justice systems and working to build bridges and better collaboration between our tribal courts, state courts, and law enforcement, both in the urban areas and our hub communities, as well as in those communities that don't have a law enforcement presence, which is unfortunately many of our communities. And through strengthening our ability to do protection orders, we can perhaps begin efforts to really look at preventing murders and our relatives going missing. It is a common, supported by fact and history and lots of research, that domestic violence and sexual assault really has gone unreported and rampant, and leads to the violence that then produces the murders. Next slide. Okay, I want to just highlight a couple of the messages that the toolkit and our collaboration through the work group really wants to emphasize. We emphasize this to not just our tribal communities, but those in urban areas like Anchorage. There's still a long-standing myth and misinformation that when somebody goes missing, whether it's in the village or in an urban area, that a law enforcement report of that somebody's missing has to wait for 24 hours. And unfortunately, there are still a number of law enforcement agencies or individuals who will not take a report because they say that. Our message to families and community members is to not believe that. If you call and you are attempting to make a report and nobody's taken the call, the first call that you made says you have to wait 24 hours, just go to the next person or go higher. Go to the Alaska State Trooper, or go to the next neighboring law enforcement agency. Get it reported so that folks can be mobilized right away. Designate a family point of contact, whether it's family member or community member, law enforcement and or any other investigative or search parties want to have just one person or two people at the most for a point of contact that helps be able to coordinate the communication between agencies and entities that continue to have a long-standing mistrust for each other for various reasons. Post public updates if the missing person, the fact that somebody's missing is posted on social media, be sure and have somebody in charge of the social media so that updates can be made, especially if that person is found. Then update that. Keep logs, issue alerts, and above all, next slide, Kelsey, go into doing some community organizing, which can be a number of things. Anything from vigils when somebody's been found to have died, or just awareness. And then the other thing that we advocate is to not just wait for tragedy to occur, but part of the building of response action plans that are being done through either the AK and WRC toolkit or the MMIP response plans, or even the education and awareness about tribal protection orders. All those are aimed at building awareness and helping to prevent these violent acts to continue to occur. So that's one of our biggest messages. And we are particularly focusing and addressing Anchorage because so many of our village and tribal citizens end up traveling for medical, for shopping, for lots of different, for jobs sometimes, whether they're coming in to move permanently or coming in just for a temporary stay, then some of that violence occurs. And those individuals are then far, far away from their support, from their family. And unfortunately, as was mentioned in one of the earlier slides, becomes invisible and is in an unfamiliar area. So being able to raise that awareness and educate hub communities like Anchorage, Bethel, Juneau, Nome, those communities are so important because we do travel within communities. So I am on the next slide, and I'm going to turn it back over to Kelsey, unless Alex has joined us. But
he's unable to join us.
Okay,
But Deb, can you put in the toolkit website into the chat? I was
Yeah.
afraid I would disrupt my screen share.
I forgot you were screen sharing, so go,
Um, Thank you. So this next section, this is, Deb covered a little bit of this about what we're hearing from families who are affected by this, have missing loved ones or murdered loved ones and aren't finding assistance or justice or transparency in working with law enforcement or the justice system. Deborah mentioned the conflicting instructions from police and dispatch. And we know that this one has been corrected in many places. Now the general message is not to wait. But a lot of people, when they have a runaway child, if the kid, especially if they've run away before, they'll hear on occasion from dispatch say, wait and see if they come home. And so the damaging part of this is, like, I know that's not the policy, but there's still this perception that goes around the community. And it's so hard to get rid of these rumors that go around. The next thing Deborah also mentioned around difficulty getting tribal protective orders recognized. And this can be with the state. This can be with troopers. And then there's also, people coming into Anchorage, traveling in for medical, for shopping, school, what have you. We know that the officers who are out on patrol, if they come across a tribal protective order, it might look unfamiliar to them, and they don't want to, they don't want to do the wrong thing. They're not quite sure maybe when they see this what they're looking at, or if it's legitimate. And we understand, like, hesitation in getting these things wrong. But that can be damaging too, and that can, compromise someone's safety. And especially since this is such a hub, having greater understanding around protective orders will help the situation. And recently we received data from the Alaska Criminal Justice Commission, the ACJC annual report around prosecution data. And a lot of this backs up what we hear about families not receiving justice or investigation from the justice system. And it's a shame because victims are taking the risk to go and make the report, and then abusers are in charge. And I don't have the exact statistic in front of me, but it was hundreds of reports, and a very small percentage were actually charged. And for some of that data, or some of those cases, there are valid reasons why, the person wasn't charged, why there wasn't an investigation, but it can't possibly account for all of them. So something is going on there. Positive things we know about, we know that there is the APD missing and runaway or abducted persons policy. And that has added transparency to how people can make reports. We also know that there's the little blue book that gets handed out to families or to victims of crime. And we also know that there's the cold case unit that's helping to investigate these things. So those are all positives. And we'll get to those in a minute. We have suggestions around them. The next thing I want to share is around the Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA. It requires that law enforcement gives any valid tribal protective order full faith and credit recognition. And it can be coming from any other state, tribe, or territory. And they just check if it's valid on its face. And Deputy Attorney General Rob Henderson wrote a memo about this in 2017. That was clear, but I think some of that information still hasn't trickled down. It's not everyone knows this, and there's always staff turnover, and there's always more opportunities for education. So what we are asking for, so the first thing we noticed, we're really happy to know that there was a missing persons policy. on APD's website. The one thing that we notice is it's really difficult to find. And if you're a panicked family member, I don't think, it took me a Google search or two to find it, because I was like, I know this is around here somewhere. It would be very difficult to find this. And there is that nice I want to menu on the website, and we think it would be great if there was an I want to report a missing person on their website. And we know this is a recommendation to APD, but as the assembly, we're hoping you can encourage this kind of change. And we have shared these recommendations with Lieutenant Soto, with APD. So yeah, so that is, the missing persons policy is excellent. We just hope that information can be easier to find. And then, we're also really appreciative of the cold case unit page. We think that is laid out really well. Perhaps something like that would be good for missing persons. The next thing we can recommend is updating the little blue book that gets handed out to families to feature a page regarding missing persons, or possibly MMIWG2S or missing and murdered Indigenous persons. And so currently the only missing persons information in that book is regarding children who have run away. So I think additional information would be good there. And then we also recommended for APD to establish a clear policy regarding tribal protective orders and the procedure for, reviewing and enforcing those as well. And then so for the suggestion there was, we know that police academy trainings are already packed, and that there might not be, that might not be the place to train on these things, but we suggested in-service trainings on missing and murdered Indigenous people, women and girls, and Two-Spirit, as well as a training on VAWA compliant tribal protective orders and how to deal with those. So those were our suggestions. The other things we wanted to recommend was, we know that the municipality has a formal government to government relationship with Native Village of Eklutna. I believe part of that is consultation or, working collaboratively with Eklutna. And I think, we think that hosting a public session on this issue would be especially meaningful. It would be a good opportunity to convene service providers, Native community, and others and experts on the issue to talk about what can be done and to create a coordinated response. This next bullet point, Anchorage is obviously our biggest municipality, and there's a great opportunity here to set, a good example around shared procedures between different agencies, especially when related to or in regard to cases involving missing and murdered Indigenous people. And then the last thing we'd like to recommend is a prevention aspect of this. As we went over in the first part of the presentation, this isn't a standalone issue. There's lots of different things that could be going on in your life that lead you to become a missing or murdered person. And so the prevention aspect of this and the public health aspect is absolutely essential. So those are our recommendations, and I'm just looking at the time, but here, here's it's a little bit small, but all of our websites, and please feel free to reach out to us for more information regarding the issue or what can be done. We're happy to talk in more detail. So I'm going to end the screen share now. And does anyone have any questions for us?
Yeah, it looks like we do. First, I just want to say thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. The slide deck is on the Public Safety Committee website, so I encourage folks, if they'd like to have that, to go there. And just another note that I do know that we are going to be working on a resolution on this topic, and would love your help with that to make sure that we're getting all the most important information in there. But I do have a question or a comment from Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Weddleton.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. You continue to make a good case that this is kind of a shocking issue, and I appreciate that. And your ask from the city is pretty light. It sounds like all stuff that we can do, so that's good. It's a little bit related, and just something I've been thinking about recently. But we had a kind of resolution or policy statement to remove the names of people who are victims of domestic violence or have protective orders and so on from our property tax info, which is publicly available. And it seems like that ties into some of the people that you're dealing with through this. But we need a state law change for that to happen. Is that on your radar at all? Or?
Not mine personally, but that's
Okay.
a really excellent idea. Are you working with anyone at the state legislature who could help with a fix for that?
I think we sent something in, and it was something Forrest and I think
Okay.
might have worked on a couple of years ago, and then it came up again in another context, and we were just kind of brushing that off and going, you're kind of wondering, maybe we need to get back on this. So, and of course, as in most things, if someone else is doing the work, we don't have to. But if you're, so we'll probably be picking that up. I just wanted to know if that was on your to-do list. Thanks.
This is Deborah, and I'll just say thank you for bringing that up. It has not been on our radar necessarily, or at least not that we've talked about in our meetings, but I certainly made a note of that. And I think if that's being done in Anchorage, I would really be interested in any data on how difficult that was to do internally by scrubbing the tax database that is available to the public. And I would imagine that there's some efforts to make sure that that's done in the first place, as well as updated. There's, protection orders come and go. Sometimes they're only good for 30 or 90 days. Sometimes they're good for a year, and then they expire. So I would be really interested. So if you have a person up there that was involved with doing that, if you could put their name and contact number in the chat, we can follow up on that.
Well, we never did it because a state law needs to change. There's some statute, so
Okay.
we were limited. Thanks.
Great. It looks like that's all the questions. I want to thank you guys again for being here, and thank you for the presentation. It's so important. And thank you for the specific recommendations, because we can follow up on that and work on those. And just to make sure you're aware that the new chief of police, Chief Curl, is on the line today. And so we'll work with him and the administration to try to implement as many of those recommendations as we can. Again, thank you for your time, and thank you for being here today.
Yes, thank you. And I'm really happy to hear that the recommendations are doable, and hopefully we'll expect to see some, if not all of them, started to be implemented fairly shortly. So.
Yeah, and I do see a hand raised. I don't know if that's somebody from the administration, or who has their hand raised?
That's me, Mr. Gates.
Oh, yes. Dean, go ahead.
Thank you. I was about to type in the chat. Mr. Weddleton referred to legislation that was brought forward to the Assembly in the past, and I just wanted to mention I recall that. And I will find it and forward it to Mr. Weddleton and the sponsors, so you have the actual document to follow up with. Great.
Thank you, Dean. And I don't know if there are 3 folks on that, but if there's room for one more, I'd love to be involved in that as well. So, okay. Well, thanks, folks. We're going to move on to our next item of business. I'm happy to introduce our new chief, Chief Curl. And if you want to get us started and introduce yourself and share your update from the Anchorage Police Department.
Okay, good morning. I'm excited to be here. So I'm supposed to do an introduction of myself. I'll just give you a little bit of background. I've been, prior to the here at APD, I was in the military for 11 years. I was a helicopter pilot. I also was a company commander. I was stationed at Georgia, Virginia, Hawaii, Korea, did tours in a little stint in Haiti for a while there. I've held many positions up to a division level plans and operations officer. I came to APD a little over 25 years ago. I was a patrol officer first, patrol sergeant, stayed on the streets for the first 19 years, then promoted to lieutenant, took over the special operations section. I spent a little time as a lieutenant, then promoted to the crime suppression division as a captain, served there for just 2 years, and then I was promoted to deputy chief of administration. I served there just under 2 years as a deputy chief. I took over when Deputy Chief Aston stepped down. I was doing both roles as administration and operations. And yesterday was my first day as the chief of police. I want to thank the assembly for confirming me last night. And today's my birthday, so that's all you need to know, I guess.
Happy birthday. That's great.
Let's see. Sunny, are you on the line? So there's Sunny. Sunny's my PIO. She's going to give you guys a brief overview of our community outreach efforts. So Kiana, if you could put up the community outreach slide so that Sunny can brief everybody. Sunny, say hello to everybody.
Hi, good morning. I am Sunny Guerin. I'm the Community Relations Director here at APD. Just a little bit about myself. So I'm Gwich'in Athabaskan, born and raised in rural Alaska. I served 7 years in the military before settling here in Anchorage. I worked at Doyle Limited and GCI, and prior to working here at APD. So I'm excited to serve in this role and look forward to building a strong relationship with our community and their police officers. So, and if we can, is the slide, there we go. And you can just go to the second slide. I just have one slide to really talk about. So for our community outreach, so we have our Anchorage Cops for Community. They're having their annual fundraiser. It is this Saturday, which is February 5th from 6 to 9. You can get information on their website, which is anchoragecopsforcommunity.org. They also host our Coffee with a Cop, which our last one was on Friday. And that was at the Alaska Cake Studio in the 5th Avenue Mall. Our next one is scheduled for Thursday, March 3rd from 10:30 to noon at the Fresh Cut Playhouse. This is really an opportunity for the police officers and the community members to meet over coffee or cakes or whatever the thing is at the day, and learn more about each other and also issues impacting our community. And then our Citizens Academy. So we had 20 citizens who graduated in December. Our next session, I think we'll have about 25 community members who will be going through this next session. It'll run from March 2nd through May 18th. And this is an opportunity for citizens to really get an intensive and interactive overview of APD. And it's a goal of improving communications and obtaining citizen input and support. And at the end of the day, it's our hope that the graduates will become partners with us to help identify problems and solutions to crime issues that impact our community. We also have a sledding with the YWCA on March 11th, and this is really to honor women in law enforcement. We're not sure where the location is, but we'll find out closer to that time. And then our ride-along program. So unfortunately, due to the rise of COVID cases, we have paused our ride-along program through February. And so we'll look at it in March and see how we are, and we'll move forward. But thank you.
Thank you, Sunny. Now you know why she's my communications director, because she is well-spoken and a very good representative of the Anchorage Police Department. Next, I'll go over the crime statistics for 2021. These are our UCR. So Kiana will go to the next set of slides, and this is a pretty long presentation. I'll go through them fairly quickly. If you have any questions, just ask me, and I'll answer whatever questions I can. I think you'll see that our crime is still continuing to trend down. Next slide. So this just gives you the comparisons, our annuals from 2016 to 2021, and it breaks it down. Next slide, please. So there are homicides. We had one more last year than 2020, but you can see the previous 4 years, we averaged roughly 29 homicides. So the homicide rate has continued to trend down. It's a slight uptick for last year. Next slide, please. Forcible rapes, it went down last year. Our lowest year was 2017, but you can see that it trended up in 2018, 19, and 2020, and we had a slight decrease last year. Next slide. Robberies were way down. We love to see this crime trend. It seems like the majority of the country in the lower 48 violent crime tends to be increasing. Here in Anchorage, it tends to be decreasing, and it's continued to decrease last year. And with the efforts that we're going to put forward, hopefully they'll continue to decrease here in the city. Next slide. Aggravated assaults again went way down last year. Next slide. Burglaries were slightly down last year. They've been trending down for the past 3 years, and they were again slightly down last year. Next slide. Thefts, larcenies, saw a substantial decrease last year, and we've been trending down pretty substantially over the last few years. And I know one of the major questions you guys are going to ask me is, how is this happening? And it has to do with the increased number of police officers we have on the street. It also has to do with our crime prevention strategies that we've implemented and that we will continue to implement here in the city. Next slide. Motor vehicle thefts, again, they continue down. We saw a drastic decrease in 2019, and there was one of our crime prevention strategies where we worked with our federal partners. We worked with the Department of Law, and we actually came up with a comprehensive plan, and it worked, and stolen vehicles have continued to decrease, and hopefully it will continue to decrease this year as well. Next slide, it's just another chart to show homicide. Basically, it's a reconfiguration of the initial chart. Next slide is the same thing for rapes, breaks it down by months. Robbery will be the next slide, just again, breakdown by months, and shows the crime trend. And then aggravated assault, again, broken down by month. And we have burglary, the same thing, broken down by month over the past 2 years. Larceny, we'll do the same thing. Next slide. Motor vehicle theft is the next slide. Again, broken up by 2 years. The next slide here is our robbery categories. You can see whether
Chief,
a fire. Yes.
Chief, I'll pause you for a second. I'm getting a few questions, and I'm guessing they're on some of the graphs you just went on. So let me first have Mr. Weddleton and then Mr. Peterson.
Well, thanks, Chief. Can you back up just a couple slides here? That would be fine there. So all of these have something that it seems new to me, is you have a 95% confidence interval. So that suggests to me you're doing, it's like a sampling. Usually when you're sampling, you have, kind of a confidence interval. So tell me how to interpret that confidence interval.
That's a good question. And I am going to have to get with my crime analyst to figure out what that actually means. I think it's probably due to the fact that our data is extracting the data from our systems, as you guys, we mentioned this in the past, can be a tedious process. And when we say 95% confidence, I'm pretty sure that this means that this data is 95% correct. There could be a few instances that are missing due to our lack of availability in getting crime data from our systems. Once we go to a new CAT RMS program, that'll be alleviated. But if that's not the case, I will let you know, and I will forward this to, once I get the answer, I will make sure that I send that to the committee to make sure that that answer is properly answered. That question is properly answered.
Yeah, I appreciate that. A lot of the data that we get, I think particularly like COVID stats and things like that, there should be, a lot of it is estimated. We should get some kind of confidence interval. We don't. We just pick this number as if it is.
Actually, yeah.
And it's not always. So this is handy. If I just need better detail. And you could email it, would be fine. Thanks.
So actually, Captain Case is on the line as well. I mean, Deputy Chief Case is on the line. He's worked closely with the crime analyst to get data. He's one of our data gurus. So, Sean, if you're on the thing, can you pop in and answer that question?
Yes, sir. So, Mr. Weddle, when that green band there looks at the data over the last 5 years, and that's the average range over the 5 years. So if you remember, our motor vehicle thefts were very, very high a couple of years ago, and so that's why you see that green band is above where all of last 2 years data is. Because if you take the 5-year average, our average was well above where we've been the last 2 years. So we use that green box to kind of tell us if we're in that green box, we're with 95% confidence, we're basically staying even throughout the course of time. So you can see with motor vehicles here, we're well below kind of that average number over the last 5 years. So that has been trending extremely down. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. It's real different than what I expected, but I guess you're just saying, is it just a kind of random thing that we're bouncing up and down, or is it actually a true trend, or it sounds like that's what it signifies. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say with this particular chart, what you're saying is that we have truly trended so far below what our 5-year average is that we're not even touching in that green band anymore. Whereas some of the slides you'll see we're within that green band.
Okay, yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
And I'll go to Mr. Peterson, but I just want to get one more clarification. The green band signifies the previous 5 years, and the dotted black line is the average of the past 5 years, so that we can see it in comparison to the last 2 years. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So Kiana, go back to the aggravated assault chart. I think that'll stress right there. So that's this is a better representation for what Deputy Chief Case was saying, where you can see that we're actually higher than some of the averages that have been in the past.
Okay. That's very helpful. Okay, Mr. Peterson, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my question was also about the 95% confidence interval, and so they've given a good answer to that. So I thank the chief for that. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, Chief, you can continue with your presentation.
Okay, Kiana, we're back to the UCR robbery category right there. So this just breaks it down by whether, because it is a robbery, it's a firearm, a knife, other dangerous weapon, and a strong arm, that's without a weapon. That's but an indication of that's a use of force. Next slide. So the basically just breaks out the assaultive categories by simple assault, aggravated, weapons, and with a firearm. Just a different look. We can go ahead to the burglary next. This breaks down to the type of burglary, whether forcible entry was used, unlawful entry, or attempted forcible entry. And finally, a different look from a breakdown of the larceny theft cases. It just breaks it out a little bit different by year. And the final slide is just our badge. So that concludes that presentation. I'm not sure, that's all I had to discuss today. Is there anything else we want to discuss?
I don't see any. I don't see any questions in the queue. So I think there's no questions. Oh, yep, you were back in. That's right. Go ahead, Mr. Weddle.
Leapfrog, first one. Just a couple small ones, and one is I'm surprised at how small the citizens police academies were, because I did it and my wife did. I think we were up in the 40 plus, and wonder if that was just did you intentionally do that, or are you having less applicants? Because I found it incredibly valuable. Really glad you're doing that. And then for the real police academy, we had, 10 graduate from the previous one, and I understand we're expecting a similar number out of the current one. And that leaves us really short on officers coming up. And, you got a plan? Thanks.
We do have a plan. I'm gonna, hey, Deputy Chief Case, come up and talk about what your initial plan is with the study that we're doing, or the survey we're doing. So this is one of our things. I'm going to let, this was Sean's idea, and I'm going to let Sean talk about a community survey that he's having conducted as we speak to help us with our recruiting efforts.
Next Monday, actually, we are going to be running, we've hired an outside entity to run a focus group with 14 members, and it's specifically focusing on women in policing and trying to increase our number of female applicants that we have. And so what we're hoping to get out of that focus group is, better ways to market the police department, benefits that interest applicants, what's drawing people or what's discouraging people to apply for the police department. And then when we get done with that, we will have a kind of a campaign that will be social media, print, to try to increase our recruitment based on that focus group. And we'll also kind of build a wider range, if you will, of a recruiting effort based on that focus group. It's the first one that we're doing. Love to probably do one more that kind of goes outside of just the narrow focus of women in policing, but we really wanted to target our numbers with our women at the Anchorage Police Department. So that's kind of where we're starting, or one of the things that we're doing. We've looked at our hiring processes over the last couple of years to really kind of make the process easier to navigate for all of our applicants. Kind of just looked at each piece and each step of the process where we have applicants that drop out of the hiring process to try to determine if there's anything that we can do to make that more simple or better explain the process for applicants. Because what we're seeing over the last several years is the number one reason that our applicants are no longer in the process, the hiring process, is they self-select out. So really doing a better job of communication. I tell you, the biggest challenge that we have right now is the recruitment opportunities because of COVID have not come back to pre-COVID times. A lot of the functions that we would attend where we would get applicants are still not open to the public. They haven't started up after COVID. So that's really hurting us. We're seeing that throughout the country as well. So we got a plan. We're working on it, but it's definitely a challenging time to get applicants right now.
Thank you, Sean. And Ms. Welton, you'll hear me at every event I go to. I'm setting up a meeting with all the community leaders. And one of the things that you will hear me constantly say is the Anchorage Police Department is a fantastic place to work. Please encourage anyone you know to apply to the police department. I mean, we're out there. We have a great department. We have a great city to work for, and it's a great place to work. And you'll hear me say that everywhere. As far as the Citizens Academy, we do not have a lack of applicants. We have too many applicants. We just scaled it down a little bit. It makes it more manageable for our team to manage a smaller number. And that's the only reason.
Great. That's great. Yeah, I really appreciate the information. I appreciate that you're doing like focus groups. It's like, well, we don't know why, but we're going to learn. And that's, I think it's real important that you're stepping back to get that kind of information. So thank you.
Great.
Any other questions?
It does not look like it, Chief. Thanks very much for your presentation. I did want to, before we move on to the next item, just do a quick, I said this last night, and I know you're aware of this, Chief, but we are planning a joint meeting between the Public Safety Committee and the Public Safety Commission to discuss the body camera policy, and that's going to be on February 18th. Is that right? At 1 o'clock. And then there's a number of pre-meetings prior to that to plan for that. And so you and me and the city manager and the city attorney are going to try to meet. And there's a number of other meetings to try to make sure that that's a really positive and productive meeting. So I just wanted to make sure that the folks were aware of that and that that's coming. Thank you, Chief. And we're going to move on to the Anchorage Fire Department. Chief Schrage, are you here? There you are. All right.
Yes,
take it away.
I am here. Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Doug Schrage here, Anchorage Fire Department, and I have a presentation. I'm looking for the one titled AFD Report to the Public Safety Committee.
Let's see, do we have, just there we go. Thanks, Kayana.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That's great. So let's move ahead. There we go. Item 1 is an update on our Fire Station 3 traffic preemption. With the collaboration between the municipal manager, the traffic department, and the fire department, we settled on alternative 3, which was among several alternatives that was offered in a 2019 traffic study. And alternative 3 involves, oops, we went backwards a slide. Alternative number 3 involves installing a manually operated control for the Opticom system at Fire Station 3. The Opticom system is the equipment that will turn a traffic signal green in the direction of travel for the fire department. So what this will enable us to do is the firefighters, when they're dispatched out, or the paramedics and EMTs, they will be able to manually activate and control the intersections at either end of their entrance onto McGraw Street. Originally in the 2019 study, this option was expected or predicted to cost $19,800. We're up to about $30,000 now, owing to about a 50% increase in the cost of the equipment. Traffic received a quote for the equipment, and it's about 50% higher than what it was in 2019. They're expecting 2 months to install it, and this is really good news. So it's a testament to the engineers over at traffic and the support of the manager for helping us work through this. And if there are no questions, we can move into item number 2 on my agenda, which is a summary of the fire department's overtime.
Hold on, Chief. It looks like we do have a question from Mr. Rivera.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Chief. I really appreciate your work on this. 2 months for installation. Do we have sort of a timetable of when we think this will be installed?
I think we're thinking that, I mean, they're working on it now. Some of the equipment has been ordered, or the equipment has been ordered, is my understanding. They've gone through the procurement, and so I think we're looking at probably sometime in April. So 2 months from last week or thereabouts.
Great. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
It looks like that's all the questions. So
okay,
proceed.
That was easy. Turning on to our overtime summary. This is looking at the month of January. It was a really big month for us in terms of overtime. You can see from the table here that we paid out about 4,000 hours of overtime just during January, which is considerably higher than what we did a month or a year ago in January of 2021. 34% of our overtime in this January is attributed to COVID-19. There are several pay codes listed there that altogether amount to 98 shifts of overtime, or about 1,327 hours, or about $90,000 just for COVID in the month of January alone. Our total overtime for the month of January, including COVID overtime, was about 219,000. So it's quite a bit. We can go to the next slide. We'll do a side-by-side comparison of January of 21 and January of 22. There's one line that's different, and that's why you see there's a mismatch, and that is in 2021, we had some mandatory callback overtime. It's the second line we didn't have any of that this year, so that explains the mismatch. We had 2 shifts of mandatory callback. So you can see last year in January, 2,400 hours. January of this year, 4,000 hours. If we subtract out the 1,300 or so hours of COVID from January of 2022, and the just a little bit less than 200 hours of COVID overtime in January of 21, the numbers are pretty close. So our overtime this month is, if you back out the COVID, is about the same as what it would have been a year ago. So let's move ahead to the last slide, and this is the one that will probably be of the most interest to the people on this meeting. And that is this is a summary of our closures in January. It was a big month for us. As a reminder, in the 4th quarter of 2021, so October, November, December, we deferred $148,000 in overtime. In January alone of 2022, we deferred about $110,000. So 2/3 of what we did in the 4th quarter. So there were closures every single day of January, an average of about 2.5 units unstaffed every day after 9 p.m. There was one day when we closed 4 units at a time, 13 days when we closed 3, and 16 days when we closed 2 units. Altogether, we reduced our overtime spend by 34% of what it would have been. And even still, we still spent $209,000 in overtime in January. So we are chipping away at it, but we're still exceeding our normal budget for what we should be spending on overtime. I'll draw your attention to just the last 2 lines here, the day of calls. So these are unplanned. This is sick calls, people calling in. We had quite a few people that called in because of the windstorm that we had, and people that lived in the valley who had to attend to lines down and boilers that were out and things like that. 41% of our overtime was the result of day of call outs. And almost all of that was due to COVID, as you can see, 39%.
Yeah.
So that concludes my report, and I'll take any questions. Yes, sir.
Yep, Chief, I've got one for you, but I'm gonna hold on mine and have Mr. Weddleton ask his question.
Well, thanks. So, looking at when you see 2.45 units on staff per evening, it seems like a lot, and it feels alarming. What is the impact on the ground? Because, like you look at response times as kind of seems like a standard metric of have we done well, and maybe you have others, but so, what is it kind of on the ground for someone who calls in? What's the impact?
Well, there are two categories of impact. Thank you, Mr. Weddleton, through the chair. One is the impact on our operations. So far, we haven't experienced major disruptions in our response times, and that's due to the nature of the manner in which we're planning these closures. As you know, and as a reminder, we're not closing like units in neighboring stations. So we wouldn't close an aerial in Station 1 and Station 5 in Spenard because we want to be assured that we have an aerial close by to be able to meet our response standards. Also, similarly, we're not closing any units in Eagle River or the Southport Station and other places where if we close the unit at Southport, it would take the entire station out of service because there's only one truck there. It's an engine. So there haven't been disruptions in our response time. We've still been able to get the first units on scene within our specified or within our traditional response times, what we would normally experience. Where we are seeing the operational impact is in the subsequent arrivals of additional units. So we have a standard, which is we want to get the first BLS or the first responders on scene for a fire. We want to get 4 firefighters on scene or a BLS unit on scene within 4 minutes. And while we're not meeting that all the time, that number hasn't eroded due to these closures. Our other standard is we try to get ALS or 15 firefighters on scene within 8 minutes. And we are seeing that number is suffering. So our initial response is quite good. It's the totality of the response that has eroded a little bit. The other category of impact is on the firefighters and the medics themselves. One is we're getting a lot of, it's a morale buster. We're getting a lot of complaints from the line personnel about the unpredictable nature. One day we're closing truck 12 and another day we're closing truck 1 or rescue 4 or something, or not rescue 4, maybe engine 2 or something like that. And so it seems very random to them, which makes it, disruptive to their plannings. It's also very off-putting and disruptive to when we close down a truck. If we have a truck with 2 people that called out sick, we might close that one. The other 2 people who did show up then are at 9 p.m. are taken off that truck, sent to a different station. And it's disruptive to them to pack their gear, move to a different station, and reconstitute in a different crew. And so while the plan is effective, we are reducing our overtime. I don't feel that it's something that we can do for a long time. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I don't see any other questions in the queue right now. I would just really, I appreciate your presentation so much. I said this in our pre-conversation that this is not sustainable, and I realize that we're in a financially challenging situation, and I really appreciate the efforts in terms of trying to reduce spending in order to match the budget, but it's increasingly concerning to me that we're having to close units, and that it feels very risky. And so this is not the area of our city that I want to take a risk in. This is an area of our city I think we want dependability, we want consistency, we want to make sure that we are ready and prepared. And I think you have an incredible team who is doing the best they can in this situation. But it's clear based on these numbers that this is not sustainable, and I think we really need to have a serious conversation about how this is going to proceed for the rest of this year and into the future. So not putting this on you, sir, at all, but I think it's our responsibility to make sure that we're funding our fire department in a responsible way. So, Mr. Peterson, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was looking at a presentation that showed some response times, and it was comparing 2020 to 2021, and we were up to 6.3 minutes of response time in 2021, which was up more than half a minute, for close to 45 seconds from the previous year. And I'm just wondering if that has anything to do with some of the rolling closures. Or whether I don't know whether you can, whether that data is available or not, but just thought I'd ask that question. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Peterson, through the chair. Okay, well, you've identified an error in the data that I provided. The data are correct, but what is incorrect are the field labels. So if the slide that you're looking at is slide number 8, this is on a presentation that I shared, but it's not on the agenda for my presentation today. But if you're looking at it, we're on slide number 8, and the data labels are incorrect. So where it says 20 22, 21, and 20. It should be 2021, 20, and 19, like it is on some of the other slides. So the higher response time is 2020, even though it's labeled 2021 in this slide. And I'll be sending a corrected. There we go. I'll be sending a corrected slide presentation with the right labels. But it was the 2020 pandemic year that slowed down our responses, and that is largely because our crews were before they could drive out of the station, they had to don these suits and the breathing apparatus and things that they would use when we were first learning about the pandemic. And so that's what I attribute the slower response times. You can see that it more or less returned to, well, it returned exactly to 2019 in 2021.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chief.
Great. I don't see any other questions in the queue. Thank you, Chief, for your presentation. And thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, we're going to go on to our next item of business, an update from the Law Department. Sarah, are you on? There you are. Up, and I think you're muted. Oh, and actually, let me, while you're figuring out the mute, I have a question from Dean Gates for Chief Schrage. Chief, can you come back on just for a second?
I'm here.
Great.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Chief Schrage. It just occurred to me to ask, when we talk about the rolling closures policy and things like that, whether there might be some impact on our ISO rating for public protection classification and for the municipality of Anchorage or for homes in the areas, especially when there's fire station closures is an area. I mean, will there be an impact? And I was recalling that in like 2015, the ISO agency improved Anchorage's rating from a 2 to 1, and that's the highest rating as I understand it. But do you, I guess, maybe have any notion or instinct about what the impacts, if there are any, there might be on the ISO rating for our communities?
Yes, Mr. Gates, through the chair, I'll respond quickly because I realize we're short on time. The short answer is I do have concern about that. It all depends on how the ISO will consider our data when we submit our next update. So what they traditionally have done is they have just looked at our daily staffing rosters, and if they do that, they would see that our daily staffing hasn't changed because it reflects the same number of people during the first half of the shift. They wouldn't necessarily know that we have fewer people on the second half of the shift. If they look at the totality of the shift and they identify the reduction in staffing, and of course we would be forthcoming with that, then yes, that could erode our score. Whether or not it erodes it enough to move us down into Class 2 territory, it's hard to say just now, but it is a legitimate concern and something that we are thinking about.
Great.
For very fair response. Thanks, Chief Schrage. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you. So Kayana is saying *6 to unmute, but Kayana, you can't unmute her on Teams, huh? Because it's showing her muted. Oh.
It's showing her unmuted.
Yeah, it's showing you unmuted now, Sarah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Sorry, I was unmuted previously, but Teams just turned on me, and that's how it is.
No worries.
The first thing I wanted to talk about was recruiting and staffing. And I'm going to put this down on speaker. So there is a shortage of attorneys in Anchorage and probably other places too. Every government agency in town is short people. Private law firms can't find attorneys to hire. All the government agencies, state, federal, court system, all have openings and are all trying to poach attorneys from each other. So right now we have 2 openings in prosecution, and one of them, the one that's in our building, in our office, has been empty since October. So we are trying to take stronger steps to recruit. We've rewritten our ad for the Bar Association. We're looking into using Simplicity to reach out to law schools. We're also looking at, as we do that, we're looking at trying to reach out more intentionally to law schools that have more diverse applicants and schools that might have a higher percentage of Indigenous students. So those are some of the steps we're taking. But I just wanted, the committee to know that it's a tough market out there. And we're competing against the DAs and, the PDs and several other agencies in hiring our brand new attorneys. So that's one of the things that we're dealing with right now. The second thing that I just wanted to give you an update on, because you had expressed an interest, was our caseload. And I provided the PVR from 2021 to Kiana. And I'm not going to go through all these numbers because they're somewhat arcane, but I did look at the number in the top right corner, 8,000 cases, open cases. That means during 2021, there were 8,000 different cases that were open. And if you look down at the bottom right, you see that we received from APD about 6,000 cases. And if you go back up to just under open or declined, we declined about 1,000 of those. So we had basically 5,000 new cases come in, and yet we had 8,000 cases open. So what that means is, that's a little bit of an example of what the backlog is doing with the trial courts. So we had 60% more cases open than we had come in the door this past year. So that backlog it takes sort of a human toll. Our attorneys are working really hard, and they're down a person because of the staff shortage, attorney shortage, I should say. And so their case numbers are high. So if you, we have 10 line attorneys who handle the majority of the trial cases. So 8,000 divided by 10 is 800 cases. That doesn't mean that each attorney had 800 cases open at one moment, but that's how many went through their office in the year. And then if we're down to 9 attorneys, like we currently are, that means about 888 cases that would go through that person's office in a year at our current backlog rate. So I'm hoping that just sort of, I know I've been talking about backlog, but I hope sometimes numbers are helpful, and so I hope that helps a little. Are there any questions?
That is great. Thank you for that information. I'll pause for just a second to see if there's any questions from committee members. And I do not see any at this point. Thank you for providing the information. I want to remind committee members and members of the public that this information is on our website, on the Public Safety Committee website, so you can access it there. And Sarah, as always, thank you very much for your time and for your presentation. We have a few minutes left in our time frame here, so I did want to create a little bit of space for audience participation. We have probably time for a couple, maybe 3, depending on how long folks go. As a reminder, you'll have 3 minutes. I'll set a timer, so you'll hear a ring when your time is up. If somebody from the, yep, looks like we have 5 minutes left, so maybe 2. If someone from the community would like to *6 unmute and share your name now is the time for you to speak. Just again, anyone from the community who would like to speak, now would be your time. And reminder, it's *6 to unmute. All right, I'm not hearing anybody, and I think we could all use an extra 5 minutes today. So I just want to, again, thank everybody for being here. Thank you for all of the really great presentations. Reminder that all of the resources that were shared on at this meeting are on the website. This meeting is now adjourned. Have a wonderful day. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks, Cameron.